On Sunday, I went down to Victoria in the afternoon and came back at night to give a presentation to a number of people who are very concerned about what's happening in the schools. So what I want to do is I want to go through the talk that I gave on that night. What you're looking at on the screen is a couple of the guidelines that we've been producing for all of the Australian states: social transitioning in schools, risk and harms, and independent Australian guidelines on sex and gender in schools. So in the process of examining the school curricula across Australia, I became well acquainted with two influential programs and what they represent in terms of breach of duty of care. So this is hopefully a fast-paced talk. I'm only taking 15 minutes, and I'll provide an overview of the two influential programs and how they represent a breach of duty of care. So in Australia, we're seeing education policies and programs that undermine the safety of students, the rights of parents, and the dignity of the teaching profession. Advocates claim that these changes are in the best interests of children. However, encouraging children to reject your own bodies is wrong. Eroticizing and sexualizing a child's learning environment is wrong. And schools should never, ever lie to parents about their children, should they? What I've come to realize is that it's not so much what they are teaching, but how they are shaping kids see themselves and the world through a specific lens. And they are framing the world for children through two major lenses. One is social emotional learning, SEL, and the other is comprehensive sex education, CSE. In schools, they take a whole child approach. This means that children view formal lessons, history, maths, biology, English, etc., and informal activities through a social emotional lens that aligns with critical race theory and queer theory. With comprehensive sex education, children are taught that their core identity and purpose are rooted in their sexuality. I argue that schools are breaching their duty of care. I'll cover 4 key breaches: non-contact sexual abuse, entrapment and grooming, third-party exploitation, and psychosocial and physical harm, some of which is irreversible. So in Australia, we follow UNESCO's UNESCO Comprehensive Sex Education Program, which is mandatory in the Western world if you want UN funding or support. ARC International, founded by Striker Medical Corporation, a major supplier to the gender industry, pushes gender identity ideology into the governments, mainly via the Yoga Carta principles. They're one of the main influences pushing the Department of Education of Victoria to adopt CSE. Some principles of CSE include the right to sexual pleasure, quote, from 0 age and up, even at any young age, and it takes precedence over other rights. Children supposedly have privacy and confidentiality rights that supersede their parents' rights to guide their sexual education. And they push for internationally recognized rights to health and education, which means claiming that children have a right to all sexual information free from censorship and without parental consent. I've created a set of URLs that outline the age-specific agenda. So CSE starts in daycare and extends to high school. I'll expand on this a bit further. Overall, CSE teaches children to masturbate, explore diverse sexual orientations and gender identities, experiment sexually with individuals of the opposite sex, the same sex, and different ages, engage in higher risk behaviors, including anal and oral sex, under the guise that these behaviors are safe, access sexual counseling, information or services without parental consent, view abortion as safe and without consequence, and believe that sexual pleasure and promiscuity are the rights for children with the right drugs, making these behaviors safe. An excellent resource to bookmark is stopcse.org. So one thing I'm noticing is that there's third-party exploitation of children. Schools often outsource their comprehensive sex education instruction to external companies, organizations, community resources, which are funded by taxpayers but largely lack public accountability. In Australia, these organizations often run sex or gender clinics, directing kids towards drugs like PrEP, PrEP, a subscription-based drug to prevent HIV, necessary for those engaging in high-risk promiscuous behaviour. PEP for use after HIV exposure, and of course the standard STD drugs. In business, we call this cradle to the grave marketing. Getting kids hooked on your brand when they're young, so they'll stick with it as they grow older. For more information on these specific programs in Australia, visit our website. I've listed them on the page. In Defence of Children, under the Student tab, the Teacher and Parent tabs, you'll find lessons, curricula, and content used in our schools. So ask yourself, when does teaching become grooming? According to section 272.15 of the Commonwealth Criminal Code, grooming involves behaviour that primes a child for sexual activity, making children feel special to form a bond that encourages them to engage in sexual conduct with others or themselves, and sharing explicit or intimate details of one's sex life with a child. And also ask yourself, when is the behaviour schools engage in another type of breach of criminal code, in this case in the form of non-contact sexual exploitation or abuse? Now, this is defined as producing or showing children sexual images or having them watch sexual activities. For example, last year, a Victorian school showed naked genitalia pictures to 6-year-olds, causing distress and tears. When is encouraging children to behave sexually inappropriate not considered grooming or serious safeguarding issue? So warning, you can close your eyes to avoid sexually explicit content for the next 6 seconds or so. Just be aware that what will follow is easily accessible to children in schools. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and done. So what I noticed is that teaching becomes grooming when LGBT protections and exceptions were used to introduce overtly sexual content to children. Content that would be labelled pornographic if it involved heterosexual individuals. So this is deception. Social emotional learning began in the 1960s at Yale School of Medicine Child's Study Centre. The programs they developed originally focused on the social and emotional needs of students. Later, they aimed to guide them to, quote, critically examine root causes of inequity and develop collaborative solutions that lead to personal, community, and societal well-being. Over time, with left-leaning political interests, social and emotional learning has become a Trojan horse, used to introduce concepts such as critical race theory, sexual orientation and gender identity ideology, queer theory, social justice, and other left-wing ideologies into the classroom, including Marxism. Sanctions and deception are part of enforcing these ideas. Sanctions such as diversity, equity, and inclusion training for teachers and embedding these ideas and concepts into school policies and rules. Also, I've noticed starting up from New South Wales and Victoria, Gay Straight Alliance, GSA clubs, stand-up clubs, monitor student and teacher behaviour to make sure they're compliant, as well as the deception area is where if you ask as a parent for curricula, lesson plans, content, they're going to say no. Even so much so that the worst material is not put online anymore. It's a hard copy given to the children and handed back. So there's nothing to show the parents what they're learning in the schools. And if you ask, you're told no. So I'm sharing, I hope, a couple of minutes from Courage's Habit, a 2 to 3 minute video.
Because there's a reason that there are still a lot of people that do not understand what's happening. And it's because what is happening in the schools is extremely deceptive. And so whenever you come across something that sounds nice, I want you to always be in the habit of asking through whose lens. Next slide. This is the CASEL wheel. This is the framework that every social emotional learning program operates through. They tell people, they say, we're just going to teach children self-awareness and self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. But I'll remind you, through whose lens? Because these skills are being delivered to those children through the lens of someone who believes in queer theory or is a critical race theorist. They're not delivering these skills and teaching these skills to children in the way that I would teach them. And that is where there's a huge disconnect from what people understand, because everything sounds nice. Don't you want your children to make responsible decisions? I do. I want my children to make responsible decisions. But do I want my children to make responsible decisions based on what a critical race theorist believes? No. That is not how I want them to make their decisions. So again, through whose lens? One thing I want to mention about social emotional learning is there are over 100 SEL programs. So that's another reason it's been very difficult for people to understand, because one school district will have a program called Leader in Me. Another district will use a program called 7 Mindsets. Another one will have Second Step, just like Lisa was talking about. But they all work the same way. They all use this framework, and they all deliver the lessons through this, what they would call an equity lens. But when you hear equity lens, it just means through the viewpoint of a critical race theorist or someone that believes in queer theory.
So for your information, if you're not aware, critical race theory, CRT, is a framework that views society as structured in ways that maintain racial inequality. It builds on Marxist ideas of oppression, suggesting that certain racial groups are systematically disadvantaged. In this view, people are often characterized as either oppressors or oppressed based on their race. Queer theory, for your information, if you're not aware, challenges heteronormativity, arguing that heterosexuality is inherently privileged and oppressive. It promotes queering the binary, which goes beyond accepting LGBTQI++ individuals, advocating for children's rights to sexual experiences without parental oversight. It also introduces controversial ideas like bestiality, though through seemingly benign concepts like fairy culture. For instance, a man in a rainbow monkey suit attended a rainbow story time event. So when a teacher continually prompts children to question their well-being regarding their gender identity, this behavior amounts to a form of entrapment. In an educational context, entrapment happens when children are led towards specific beliefs or behaviors through biased emphasis or presentation. It occurs when educators do not maintain a neutral stance and guide students into adopting specific identities or beliefs they would not naturally explore on their own. So social transitioning involves encouraging changes to a child's name, pronouns, appearances, or expression, such as clothing, hairstyles, in line with their gender identity, often includes using the opposite sex toilets, change rooms, etc. This is very much a pipeline of entrapment that inevitably leads to medical or surgical transitioning, which can cause irreversible harm. So schools take an active role in this process, involving a team of teachers, counsellors, and external organisations like the Royal Children's Hospital or other gender clinics. Victoria created the model for gender affirmation plans that have been adopted in other states. Puberty is a critical developmental window that cannot be paused and restarted. It's not just about sexual characteristics. Puberty involves the maturation of the entire body into adulthood, the brain, the lungs, your organs, your stomach, everything. You can't hit pause and then play on puberty. Disrupting puberty causes irreversible harm, both in the short and long term. So a major part of this process involves getting children onto drugs. Really reminds me of the process of a pimp grooming a vulnerable young girl into prostitution. It's the same kind of process. It includes using drugs like, in this case, Lupron, originally used to chemically castrate pedophiles and rapists, and they use these on kids. Administrating at stage 2, which is about memory about 10 to 12, leads to long-term consequences such as infertility, sterilization, and the loss of the ability to experience orgasm. The risks even include death. However, the Therapeutic Goods Administration, TGA, is 96% funded by the pharmaceutical industry, so that might explain why these issues aren't recognized as concerns. If parents don't comply with their child's social, medical, or surgical transition here in Victoria and other states, the state can remove their child from their care. My co-founder, Tess, in Active Watchful Waiting, has directly dealt with over 100 parents in this situation in the last 4 years. She's been doing this for about 9 years, and it's traumatic. She's worked with 3 parents this year who require 24-hour monitoring due to suicide attempts. The family you see here still hasn't seen their child in 4 years, taken at 15, she's now 19, and still remains in state care. K-12 schools have an inherent responsibility to ensure the safety and well-being of their students, both legally and ethically. This responsibility is deeply rooted in the concept of duty of care. The question of whether a school has breached its duty of care is determined by whether was there reasonable foreseeability of risk? Would a reasonable person take precautions to prevent this risk? And does this breach of duty cause significant harm or damage? By running programs like social emotional learning and comprehensive sex education, Australian schools are engaging in risk and harm. This includes sexual and financial exploitation, the removal of safeguards, grooming, entrapment, and placing children on paths that lead to irreversible physical harm. We're collecting data from all the cases we handle with the hope of filing class actions against the state. So ask yourself finally, is this the education you want for your children? Is this the type of society we want them to live in? Do what we want to live in? If the answer is no, please use our resources and become aware, volunteer for our projects and make a difference. Take action. In defenseofchildren.org, we're focusing on the pipelining of kids to gender clinics and hypersexualization of school curricula. aww.org is our website that focuses on the medicalization of children. lostwomenrights.com is the impact of gender identity ideology on half the human race. noconflictaz.org was started up by Holly Lawford Smith. I help with it and continue with it to provide testimonies on the impact of gender identity ideology. And Bill Breakdown is a site where we take complex bills, particularly the gender identity bills, and explain what they're really about with assistance of lawyers and research people, etc. So please remember, the only action that makes a difference, the only difference you can take to make a difference is taking action. Please take action. Thank you.